Welcome to the PanAm Podcast, brought to you by the PanAm Museum in Garden City, New York. This podcast and our museum are dedicated to celebrating the legacy of the world's most iconic airline, Pan American World Airways. My name is Tom Betty, and I'm the host of this program. Thank you for joining us. The PanAm Museum Foundation is a non-profit organization. Please visit our website for more information at thepanammuseum.org. Again, our website is thepanammuseum.org. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. If you are using Apple Podcasts, please consider leaving a review. It will help others discover this program. This podcast is sponsored by the generous personal support of Mr. Adam Aaron, the CEO and chairman of AMC Theaters. He is also president of our sister organization, the PanAm Historical Foundation. If you're not familiar with PanAm, welcome. We are honored to have you here and for you to learn about what we're all about. If you already know of PanAm, worked for or flown on the airline, or just love our history, it's good to be with you again. So with that, let's get this episode in the air, so to speak. Welcome aboard your Pan American Jet Clipper. In this episode, we celebrate the Archers, a family of aviators. 89-year-old Pan Am Captain Stu Archer joined the airline in 1965 as an engineer after serving in the U.S. Air Force. Stu began flying the 727 and then was promoted to captain on the 747 and later Airbus A300 and A310. He stayed with Pan Am until 1991 and then went on to work for Delta Airlines as a captain. When he reached the then mandatory retirement age of 60 after 3 years as a Delta captain, he successfully took the company to court, forcing the airline to keep him as an engineer, and worked for another 7 years before retiring in 2000. Many credit his lawsuit as one of the reasons the mandatory age was raised to 65. Stu credits his uncle, Lawerence Archer, as his aviation inspiration. Born in 1903, Lawerence was one of the early pilots trained by the Wright Brothers and was the first person to deliver mail by air in New England. Uncle Lawerence took Stu on his very first flight in a single-engine, open-air cockpit bi-wing plane when he was 6 years old, and this forever changed the trajectory of his life. Lawerence Archer gave his life in service to his country in 1945 during World War II, serving in the U.S. Army Air Corps. Stu's daughter Deborah Archer joined Pan Am as a flight attendant in 1979 and worked for the airline until the end in 1991. Afterward, she hung up her wings and became a nurse. She sadly passed away in 2009. Stu's son, Captain Jeffrey Archer, followed in his father's footsteps and became a pilot for American Airlines in 1991 and became captain in 1995. And now his grandson, Stephen Archer, Jeffrey's son, carries on the family legacy started by his great-uncle and was recently promoted to captain with Envoy Air, a subsidiary of American Airlines. All three of these captains will be joining us to talk about their passion for flying and careers in aviation. A special thank you to American Airlines for allowing Jeff and Stephen to participate in this interview. If you are thinking about starting a career in aviation and want to be a pilot for American Airlines, visit the Cadet Academy at aacadetacademy.com. There is a link in the episode description. The Pan Am Museum also encourages you to visit the American Airlines C.R. Smith Museum in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. This museum is named after aviation pioneer and former president of American Airlines, Cyrus Rolette Smith, and has been open since 1993. Like the Pan Am Museum, the C.R. Smith Museum is a nonprofit 501c3 organization and would appreciate your financial support to continue to inspire future aviation professionals of all backgrounds through its confidence-building education programs, exhibits, and heritage collection. Their website is crsmithmuseum.org, and there is a link in the episode description. A couple updates on this program before our interview with the Archer captains. The PanAm podcast has been downloaded over 140,000 times in 173 countries and over 8,000 cities. The program has won many awards and has gone gold this year with the 2024 Gold Muse Creative Award and the 2024 Gold Vega Digital Award. A special thank you to everyone listening. Here's a preview of the next 2 episodes of this program. Next up is episode 49, where we will be exploring the incredible life of the most famous costume designer in Hollywood history, Ms. Edith Head. What's the PanAm connection? Because there always is one. She designed PanAm uniforms in the 1970s. Actor Susan Clausen will be our guest. And to mark our 3rd anniversary and celebrate our 50th episode, we'll be joined by the granddaughter of Juan and Betty Tripp, Wendy Tripp, along with PanAm Museum curator John Ludich. In that episode, we'll be exploring the life of Kathleen Clare, who served as Juan Tripp's executive assistant for decades and was close to the Tripp family and PanAm employees alike. We will also have audio clips of Ms. Clare talking about her PanAm experience to play for you, courtesy of the PanAm Historical Foundation. Again, we would like to thank all of our listeners for the continued support of this program. If you like what you're hearing, please consider supporting the PanAm Museum Foundation with a reoccurring tax-deductible donation. There is a link in the episode description. Also, you may have noticed a new feature. You can text us a message through the podcast episode description, and we would love to hear from you. However, if you want us to reply back, please include your email or phone number, as there is no way for us to message you back otherwise. Now on to our interview with Captain Stu, Jeff, and Stephen Archer. We have a special program today. We have a family of aviators, the Archer family. I'd like to welcome to the program Stu Archer, PanAm captain from 1965 to 1991. Welcome, Stu.
Hi, welcome to be aboard.
And Jeffrey Archer, welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me.
Jeffrey is a captain for American Airlines. He started in 1991 and got his captain wings in 1995. And Stephen Archer, Stu's grandson, is a captain for Envoy Air for American Airlines. Welcome to the program, Stephen.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
First of all, there's always a Ohio connection to everything. So, Jeffrey, I understand that you were born in Ohio, so you are a Buckeye for life. And Stephen, I understand that your last check ride was from Columbus to Miami. Is that correct?
It was one of my IOEs as a captain coming from Columbus to Miami.
And I understand that there was a passenger on board, a member of the PanAm Museum, John Rinaldi, whose mother, Judith, was a flight attendant for many years. He flew all of the 747s all over the world as a PanAm kid and knew Stu Archer and would bring his camcorder on all his trips as a teenager. And he recognized the name Archer. And then what happened, Stephen?
Yeah, it was pretty funny. I don't know if you saw me standing around at the gate. There's a little bit of a wait for the agent to show up. It was early morning coming out of Columbus. Or if you saw the name tag there, or when I do my PAs, I always say, "Hey, good morning, folks. It's Captain Archer, blah, blah, blah." If you recognize then. But yeah, we got up to cruise altitude and the flight attendant calls me from the back. She says, "Hey, got a passenger back here. Thinks he knows your dad really well." I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" She's like, "Yeah, this guy's name's John Rinaldi." I'm like, "Oh, cool. Tell him to wait around when we get to Miami. I'll say hi." Whatever, we get into Miami. And sure enough, here comes John smiling, shaking my hand, telling me stories. And it wasn't my dad. It was actually Stu. with PanAm. He's like, "Oh, you're the grandson," and we exchanged contacts, and here we are now.
It's there's always a Pan Am story to everything. I just love being able to tell these kinds of stories. So Pan Am somehow was blessing your promotion to captain because one of your check rides was this flight, and that's just great. Don't you think, Stu? That's like perfect.
Yeah, that was unbelievable.
All right, so Captain Archer, I'm sorry, Captain Archer, all of you are Captain Archer. Captain Stu Archer, why don't we start with you? Tell us about how you got into aviation, especially through your uncle.
Well, it's interesting. My uncle was a pilot there in upstate New York. I would see him and go to the airport and see him. But just one day, I was able to get a ride with him. He took me up in a biplane, and oh, I just absolutely loved it. He had a guy there working selling tickets for him. He would take people up and give them rides, rolls, and spins and loops and everything. And but anyway, he was the beginning of it, and I was always going to. He was going to start an airline once he got out of the Air Force, but unfortunately, he flew in World War II, flying fighters in Europe, and then went flying the Himalayas on his way back about March 45, I think it was, coming back, and he flew all his missions and everything. And he was a passenger riding back, and the airplane went into a mountainside, and virtually everybody was killed except one. And I got the story from him on the everything that happened up in the Himalayas and with a survivor. The airplane hit a mountain. One of the natives went down. Took 2 days running down to in Tibet to a rubber plantation. And anyway, they finally some rescue came, and about a month later they got the survivor out, and he told his story. And I was fortunate to be able to get the complete story from both the survivor and but that I after that, man, I always wanted to fly. I loved it.
So all of these years later, so your first flight was in the late 1930s, correct, with your uncle? Is
Right.
that about right?
1939. I was about 5 years old.
All right, so 1939. Could you ever have imagined that your son and grandson would follow you into the air as captains?
Never. That was really an unbelievable. No, I would never have guessed that in my life. No, I would never have guessed that. But it happened that way, and absolutely amazing. And I'm so proud. And my uncle would have been so proud if he could see what he generated with the influence that he had on us, had on me particularly. But Jeff got excited about it, and then Stephen got excited about it, and here we are.
And also, your daughter, the late Deborah, was a Pan Am flight attendant from 1979 to 1991. So this is a true aviation family.
Exactly, yeah, and I got to fly with her a couple times, and I never got to fly with my son as a pilot, but he was with me as a passenger, and we took him to London, Miami, London, on one of the trips. But anyway, yeah, and I'm sure that affected him too.
And have you ever flown as a passenger on either Jeff or Steven's flights?
No, but I would love to. That yeah, we. I don't think I don't think I've ever been on a flight where he was a captain. We've been on airplanes together, but not with him flying.
And Jeff and Steven, is this something that you want, or are you afraid that he's going to critique you and have a whole checklist of stuff that, oh, well, the landing was pretty rough?
What's funny is I'm giggling because I would absolutely love to have my father on the flight, but that's exactly correct. He would more than likely critique me and say, "Oh, that was fantastic, but I noticed, you came down a little firm on the landing. Gave me a Navy landing." So yeah, it would be a joy, but also no, it'd be nothing but awesome.
And Steven, what is your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it would be pretty cool. Definitely there'd be a critique going on, but I don't think he'd give me a hard time at the end of the day.
I'm not sure. Those Pan Am standards are still fresh in his mind.
That's kind of what I was thinking about.
Let's talk about airplanes for a moment before we get into some Pan Am history and also talk about American Airlines. What are some of your favorite planes? Either military, civilian, passenger, what have you? Let's start with you, Stephen.
Well, I really like the Embraer 175 I'm on now. It's the biggest plane I've flown, very modern, cockpit's great, handles really well. Yeah, I really like the 175. It's a great bird. It really is.
And Jeff, how about you?
I've actually had an opportunity to fly a lot of really very fun aircraft, from the reciprocating aircraft to turbine aircraft and now the jet age. Something that comes to mind was I was with my dad down at Homestead Air Force Base, and it was the first time I got to see the Thunderbirds. And at that time, the Thunderbirds were using the T-38s. And the laser sharp edges of that aircraft and what they were able to do always was intriguing. And I understand NASA still uses them today as a training aircraft. So that has always been one of my coolest. Obviously, never got a chance to fly it, but from a commercial aircraft, I would have to say that the 7.5 and the 7.6, the Boeing age of those aircraft, that was an amazing aircraft to fly. And now that I'm on the Airbus, a different era, it's an amazing piece of equipment, super smooth. Customers love it, and very fuel efficient. So corporate really likes it to do the same job and carry the same amount of loads that we need. But very, very, very honored to be able to have the opportunity to fly the Airbus that I'm at now.
And Stu, this is a loaded question. What is your favorite airplane?
Well, when I was in the Air Force, I absolutely loved flying the Super Constellation. I flew that for about 6 years and just absolutely loved it. And I flew the 130, which I enjoyed. I'd never been on an airplane that was so versatile, and we did a lot of crazy things, flying in the Himalayas, working with the Indians, supplying tanks and free falling fuel and ammo and everything. With PanAm, I started on a 727, and I really loved it. Really a nice airplane. But I think the 747, I just really loved that particular airplane. I really enjoyed it. I was on it for about 10 years or so, maybe just a little more than that. But anyway, I loved the 747, and the passengers loved it. And it was a beautiful airplane to fly.
And Jeff, you mentioned Navy landings, and for our listeners, this is a treat because we have an Air Force guy that can tell us the difference between an Air Force landing and a Navy landing. And some passengers can tell the difference.
Oh, that they can. So an Air Force landing, pilots take pride in making it nice and smooth because they usually have a lot of runway to work with, in the most part. Navy landings, on the other hand, are used to landing on a very small Navy ship aircraft carrier, which is a very narrow. So they have a tendency to spot point it, and that's what they're trained to do. It's very firm, but it's solid, and it's consistent.
All right, let's jump into Pan Am history, Stu. So you started with Pan Am in 1965 during the 707 jet age, but a few years before, you almost joined Eastern Airlines. Tell us about that, and then tell us about how you joined Pan Am.
I flew Connies in the Air Force, and I grew up around Eastern pilots all the time. While I was in the Air Force, I would see the folks at Eastern, my neighbors, and they basically they were senior pilots, and they said, "Man, whenever you want, come on, we'd love to have you at Eastern." So I was always planning on going to Eastern. I was a predominant airline in Miami at the time, but I was offered a regular commission in the Air Force, but I was going to be committed for a number of years. So I came down to Miami to see about going with Eastern, and this was in about 50, 58, 59 timeframe. They said, Stu, we'd love to have you, but right now going to be layoffs with the airlines. I would recommend not getting out of the Air Force at this time because there's going to be a humongous layoff. So I went back in and stayed with the Air Force, and it was And I was flying international my whole career, and the more I thought about it, that's the same thing that Pan Am was doing. And I knew Pan Am. I'd been at the terminal as a kid here in Miami, and they had the seaplanes and everything there. Anyway, so I interviewed with 2 or 3 airlines, and the interview with Pan Am was just fantastic. I really wanted to go there, and they offered me a job. So I was actually flying out of Europe at that time, and the Air Force said, "Hey, if you ferry an airplane back to Columbus, Ohio again, we're at the connection with Columbus. If you ferry an airplane back to Columbus, you can get out on arrival, and then I can join Pan Am in '64." And so I ferried the airplane back, and when I got to Ohio and went to do my paperwork to get out, they said, "Oh, you owe us another year." So I got stuck in the Air Force till October '65, and then I was able to get out and come with Pan Am, which I really, really, really loved it. In fact, if it's kind of funny, they hired me in New York as an engineer. About a week later, they decided they wanted us to be navigators. They needed navigators. So I went to the chief pilot and said, "Hey, you hired me as an engineer. I want to be an engineer." And he said, "Well," he looked at my paperwork. He says, "Yeah, we want to keep you." I said, "The first of the month, they're going to have another class in Miami as engineers. And why don't you put me in that class?" He said, "If you weren't with Pan Am, I'd put you down there right now." So I handed him a resignation, and he looked at me. He said, "Okay, but I better not ever hear about this." So he said, "Show up in Miami next week." And so that's how I got started.
Stephen, back to the story of John Rinaldi talking to you in Miami when you landed about your grandfather. And I'm sure he said what I'm about to say. And I've been warned by Jeff for Stu to cover his ears. So John probably told you that your grandfather is a Pan Am legend, right?
This is true.
And how did that make you feel that some random passenger recognized your name and reached out and said, "Hey, do you have this Pan Am connection?"
Well, growing up with Pops, he's always left a little bit of an impact. He's kind of the center of attention at a party, always telling stories and stuff like that. And, he's got a great personality. Everybody loves him. So it wasn't too far-fetched for me to believe. But it did make me feel really good because I really like Pops. Stu's a great man. And yeah, it made me feel pretty good. But we had a conversation, probably 15 minutes right there on the jet bridge, and stories about Pan Am and going back and forth. And it was a good conversation. It really was.
And Jeff, one of the things that I always try to encourage people to have is passion projects. This podcast, for instance, is one of my volunteer passion projects. And one of your passion projects, and for you too, Stephen, is fishing. Tell us a little bit about, I understand you're a famous ESPN fisherman.
Yes, that is one of the benefits of being an aviator or being with the airlines is you work hard, but on your days off, you get to play hard. You can literally walk away. You don't have to worry about paperwork, anything like that. And yes, my passion, from being here in Miami, we're close to the water. And so I always had the opportunity to play with boats. And with that leading to the water, obviously connects to the fishing. And as things grew, as time went on, I found that, between the air and the water, there were so much similarities, the challenges. I just had a passion for trying to target, something bigger and better. And I was able to fortunately get connected with ESPN and do a TV show for 6 years all around the world. And what was ironic is at that time we were using American Airlines to transport us and a lot of the camera guys to these different destinations that really were amazing. And without the aviation, obviously you wouldn't be able to, see these destinations, which tying back to Pan American, using the flying boats from their history to locate, these beautiful islands and locales to where the fishing aspect and, just everything was amazing. So yeah, it's kind of funny how it all ties back in together.
Mm-hmm. And Stu, let's talk back to your uncle. So your uncle was the first gentleman to deliver airmail in New England, and his flight certificate was signed by one of the Wright brothers. So he was in the infancy of aviation at the time. What do you think that he would have thought, seeing what you were able to see in your lifetime? From flying boats, then prop planes, then the jet age, the Concorde, supersonic travel, and so forth.
I don't know if he could have envisioned all that transpired after his flying and what we were able to see, but he would have been so proud to see what we've accomplished, and would just be, I could see a smile on his face. He would be really, really excited, and one of the things that was very interesting, one day I was on the 707. We were flying over upstate New York by Schenectady Airport, where my uncle did his last flying before he went into service. That's where I flew when I was 5 years old. And he had a helper by the name of Jack. I didn't really remember any of that at the time, except the seeing the teenager there with my uncle when we left. But we were flying. I was a co-pilot on a 707, and when we went over Schenectady, the captain said, "Hey, I used to know an Archer down there in Schenectady." I said, "That's my uncle." He said, he laughed at me. He said, "Yeah, right." I said, "Lawerence." He said, "You're right." Well, it turned out the captain was Jack Sweeney. He was the one that was hawking people to go fly with my uncle, but he became the a PanAm pilot, and my uncle taught him how to fly. It was such a small world, I couldn't believe it. And the nice thing and the interesting thing, Jack lived here in Miami, and my dad was able to get together. They got together a number of times and went over many things that transpired there in Schenectady, and I knew a few things from the times that I was there at the airport, and Jack remembered the others. So yeah, we reminisced about the days back there at Schenectady when my uncle taught him to fly. That was really a small world.
So let's talk about your time with PanAm. I understand you have lots of stories. Let's start with the presidential press charters. Some of the other episodes we've done on White House press charters, we talked to Sam Donaldson in one of our episodes, and we also talked to Dwight Chapin of the Nixon administration, and also Captain John Marshall and Claire Graham, who was a flight attendant on a lot of those press charters. And I understand it was very interesting, patriotic, and exciting. Let's talk a little bit about your experiences.
Well, I was very proud to have been selected to fly on the press charter, and that was with President Carter back in the 1980, I believe it was. It was challenging, and as you know, we got all the press on our airplane, and the Air Force One takes off first, and of course we take off after and have to pass them and get there, and get all the people out so they can meet the president on arrival the next place. And we did it also through Halloween, and it was a lot of fun. The gals would surprise the president jumping out of the crowd with their outfits on, and Sam Donaldson was hysterical at crew parties and everything. We really enjoyed him. But later on, we ended up in Chicago, and after a long day, and all of a sudden we got a call at about 1 o'clock in the morning and said, "Hey, we got to go. We got to go right now." That's when the Iran hostage crisis happened. The president had to get back to the White House, and so we flew back to Andrews, and then after the next day, we went on and flew with him, and right up to election time, and he invited us all to come to Washington for the inauguration and everything. Years later, we had my partner and I. We had a few horses, and we were running at Kentucky on Derby Day, not in a feature race, but a race just prior. And so we go down to the paddock, and on the way down to the paddock, there's President Carter being interviewed by ESPN, and I stopped and asked my partner. I said, "Hey, you want to meet the president?" And he said, I got to get to the horse and talk to do with the jockey and everything. So I waited there for a minute, and they stopped the ESPN. It was over, and as soon as they stopped interviewing President Carter, I stepped up. I said, "Mr. President, I don't know if you remember me or not." He said, "Certainly I do. You were on the press charter with us for 2 weeks." So we chatted for a bit. And I said, what are you doing? He says, "Well, I've got a horse in a race." I said, "We got a horse in a race." And his horse was Flag Admiral. So we talked for a minute. So then we went to go watch the race, and we had a pretty good horse. And actually we led the race right up to the wire, and his horse nosed us, got us by a nose at the finish line. So I turned around and saluted him. He was up in the VIP location, and I saluted him, and we went on our way. But funny enough, a few years, it was a number of years later, I was now an engineer at the time, after 60. We're in Madrid, and the station manager comes down and says, "Hey, you're going to have President Carter and his wife with you going back to Atlanta." And I mentioned to the captain, I said, I had flown with him for a couple of weeks way back, and he never answered me. They weren't too excited about having PanAm folks on the airplane with them. Anyway, so at level off, the flight attendant comes into the cockpit and says, "President Carter seems to think he knows one of you guys up here." And so the captain turned around and said, "Stu, I guess you better go back and say hello." So I did. I went back.
So the Delta captain was listening.
Yeah, he was listening, but he just wasn't acknowledging anything from me. So anyway, I walk back, and here's President Carter. He stands up out of his seat. And he says, "I thought I recognized your name." And we shook hands. And I said, "The last time I saw you, your horse beat us." He said, "Yeah, Flag Admiral. He went to Pimlico right after the race with us." He said that was the last race he won. But anyway, how he remembered me after all of that time was just hysterical. I really loved that. That was a wonderful experience flying a press charter, and I'm so proud to have had the opportunity to do that. That was really great.
Thank you very much for sharing that story. We are going to take a quick break with a PanAm commercial from 1982.
In 1935, only one airline, PanAm, stood poised on the edge of America, ready to challenge the Pacific. And today, the mighty clippers of PanAm rise majestically from 6 continents for the far corners of the world. Where will we fly to next? Well, we've been thinking.
You can't beat the experience.
Welcome back to our interview with Captain Stu, Jeff, and Stephen Archer. So, Jeff and Stephen, apparently the PanAm podcast is popular in the executive wing of American Airlines, and one of the executives recently sent me a message talking about how they love the program. I would like to talk a little bit about recruiting for American Airlines, because there are a lot of young people that listen to this program. And Stephen, you started off as a flight instructor. So let's talk about the American Airlines Academy. And that website is aacadetacademy.com.
How I got into it was I started ATP flight school, passed all my check rides with them. They offered me a job. It was out in Mesa, Arizona, in Phoenix. I get out there. All my roommates and other instructors are doing their airline apps, looking for places to go. And I'm like, well, the only spot that really makes sense for me, living in Miami, trying to get back home to base, is going to be Envoy. So I look online, and sure enough, there's a cadet program that ATP does with them. Did it, applied, sent me out to the job interview. It went great. You know, the recruiters over there, super personable, really nice guys. And sure enough, got the job, hired as a cadet instructor, earning my hours. And then once I got 1,500, get a class date at Envoy, go from there. Really, it worked out great. The timeline with COVID, I was still able to fly, get my hours. But once they started hiring again, I was in the first class after the furloughs are recalled. So it really worked out well for me. And Envoy also has the flow that goes to American. So that's kind of where I want to be, living in base, living in Miami. Life is good, and eventually American after a few more years.
Do you have any advice for anyone that is interested in becoming an airline pilot?
It's a great career. Quality of life is amazing. There are days where you're away from home, so it's harder for guys that I'm friends with who have families, wives and kids and stuff. So it's a little bit tougher for them, but being single is, really easy for me. Best way to get into it, I got friends who are doing, private pilots certificate right now, is get in, get your hours, fly as much as you can, literally eat, sleep, fly if you can. But the sooner you get those hours, the sooner you get your job application out there, you're basically going to get hired. There's so much hiring going on right now, and it's slowed down a little bit, but there's still a lot going on. It's not ending in the foreseeable future.
And Jeff and Stu, back to you. Let's talk about family trips on PanAm. Jeff, anything stand out to you that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I can tell you, I remember it like it was yesterday. The very first time I ever saw or got to ride in an aircraft, obviously at home, it's dad. But then I got the opportunity. It was Miami to Boston. And I believe he was flying the 727 at the time. Back in the day with Pan American, is you always showed up, with the slacks and tie and blazer, and you come in and here's this, 7 or 8 year old kid. And I got the opportunity to stick my head in the cockpit and was completely overwhelmed, flabbergasted with all the bells, whistles, lights, switches, and all these buttons. And who do I see is my father sitting in the left seat, getting the opportunity to stick the head in and be part of that was, amazing. I immediately knew then that was something that I wanted to achieve. And then fast forward 10 more years later, I got the opportunity to ride in the cockpit with him from Miami to London. I believe that was in 1985. I got the opportunity to fly in the cockpit on the 747 with him as a captain. And it was an amazing time. But what was tough and unique is, I obviously thought it was all glorified, being a pilot. But then I realized when you get to the destination, you've been up all night and you need to quickly go to sleep. And here I was sleeping on the airplane the entire time. I got there, I'm ready to see London. And Pops is like, son, I love you, but I got to take a little cat nap here, sir. So, yeah, no, it was like it was yesterday. I can remember that trip, Miami to Boston. Couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old.
And during Stu's career, walking through the airport with those white caps on, you were like celebrities, right, Stu?
Yeah.
Young people would come up to you, little boys and girls would come up to you, and they thought that you were rock stars.
That was really nice. And one of the nice things, talking to some of the young boys and girls, they'd ask about the flying, and it was really nice to be able to talk to them and let them know, work hard in school and work on your math and science and everything. And it's a great thing when you grow up. Give it a shot.
Any other family trips that stand out to you, Jeff? And also, Stephen, family trips on American Airlines or Pan Am?
Well, for me, I'll tell you one of the neatest experiences as growing up. My sister Deborah being a flight attendant, on occasions when they had long layovers. For instance, this one I happened to travel with her was from Miami to Rio de Janeiro, and she was down there. I believe it was like 30 hours. So we had the full day to do some sights and scene. And fast forward 25 years later, I actually flew that same flight, Miami to Rio de Janeiro, and stayed at the same hotel that we did back in the day of the Pan Am. So it was an amazing, actually, just surreal getting down to Rio de Janeiro, being on Ipanema Beach. And I believe it was the Marriott that we were at, Dad. If you remember the one that you used to stay at down there in Rio.
Yep.
It was the same hotel, 25 years later. That stands out, really, really stands out.
Stephen, how about you? Your grandfather is a pilot, first for Pan Am, then for Delta. Your dad's working for American Airlines. I'm sure you had some very interesting trips.
So one that comes to mind, and it actually includes all three of us. I must have been 8, 10 years old, and it was career day. My dad happened to be based up in Chicago at the time. Pops and I woke up. Couldn't tell you the time. I know it was dark though. And we went to the airport and flew on the plane going up Chicago, and he's giving me a little navigator thing, going on, showing us the map. We're doing little checkpoints as we go up to Chicago, looking out the window. And sure enough, get to Chicago, and who's waiting for us at the gate? It's Dad. So spent a little career day up in Chicago, show me a little bit of the ops in Chicago and kind of the things that go on with the airline, and super cool. That really left an impression on me, and definitely memorable because all three of us were a part of it. It's a cool experience.
And Stu, any emergencies that stand out to you?
When I was an engineer, first starting with Pan Am, that was a challenge. I've been flying as an aircraft commander in the Air Force on both the Super Constellations and 130s, and as an engineer, I'm seeing things that I've never seen before. Some of the pilots, it's their first checkout on jets and everything, and they were having some issues. And one, we were just in the training phase of the 727s. We didn't have any simulators, so everything had to be done live. So I was an engineer, and we're doing takeoffs and landings and touch and goes and whatnot. And anyway, we're over towards Naples at one of the airports over on the west coast of Florida. We're sitting there, and the training instructor was pushing one of the captains and rushing things, and all of a sudden he started to take off, and we didn't even have a clearance, and Eastern was cleared for takeoff and was going to be crossing right in front of us. Anyway, next thing you know, the captain released the brakes and they shoved the power up, and I just reacted and reached up and grabbed the throttle and says, "Abort, abort, abort." And just about that time, a Eastern airline went right across our bow. Wow. Everything got really quiet in the cockpit. Nobody said anything. That was one time. And another one that was interesting. One of the captains was his first solo flight after his checkout. And we flew down to Guatemala, was the first stop. Everything went great. Then he went over to Salvador. It was dark now. And the first approach, he was probably 1,000 feet high over the end of the runway. And he made a missed approach and flew down south, and we did a 180 over the lake down there and coming back. There's a mountain right next to the end of the runway, and it's on the west side of the runway. He missed that one again. And now I'm really concerned, trying to figure out, I've been flying as an aircraft commander, and I'm debating about whether to get in the seat to fly it, or I figured, let me try to talk him down. Might be the best thing, because I hadn't had any real experience in the flying the airplane, even though I knew I could fly. So I tried talking him down, and he missed the approach again. And so he went out over the lake, and the co-pilot was not very helpful. So I said, "Hey, let the co-pilot just take it and relax for a few minutes, and this time go out over the lake a little bit further." And we did. We came back in, and again, we got the mountain, and he was getting shy from it. And I said, "You're a little high, bring it down. You're doing good. Bring it down." And next thing I know, I had no idea that he had decided he's landing this time. He stuck the nose down. We hit nose gear first and banged and veered about 30 degrees to the right. And the main hit, geez, my knees shook. That never happened before. My knees were shaking like a leaf as we taxied into the terminal, and I didn't know how to write the airplane up. I mean, it was more than a hard landing. It was a severe hard landing. And the flight attendants wouldn't get back on the airplane with him. Anyway, they sent somebody else down to fly the airplane back. They checked it out, and we all survived. But it was a shock, because I had not seen anything like that in my entire flight career. But it was an experience, a challenging time for some of the new guys that had never flown jets before. But he turned out, I flew with him later, and he apologized and everything, but he got it together. But those were a couple of things that we first saw when we first started flying in a 7.2. It was
And that was late 60s when the aviation industry in general, but Pan Am in particular had a lot of CRM problems, and that's where the genesis of the whole CRM program began, correct?
Exactly, you're exactly right. And talking to some of the other pilots when we started the CRM program, I was in shock to find out from some of the other pilots just exactly what was going on. It was definitely a challenge. Definitely a challenge in that period of time.
And for our listeners, CRM means crew resource management.
Yeah, what I was going to say is exactly what Pops was bringing up, is that, obviously, starting transitioning from recips to the jet aircraft, obviously everything changes speed wise, and approaches are much quicker. Things happen at a much faster rate. And I will have to tell you that, from the years of the transitionings, one of the phenomenal things at American Airlines that I personally have seen, I've also actually seen it in Stephen when he comes home from training, debriefing, is the coordination that they do between the flight crews. That's one of the things that they strive, that basically you can fly with any guy that you haven't flown with, and it's like you've worked together for 10 years, is because they streamline and communicate really well. Each of you have a job, AKA flows, and it's very, 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 very smooth. And, going back to, you asked about the training aspect to Stephen, is that's one of the great things with these programs like ATP. There's several universities that they do. It's a 141 program. And so it's a structured training facility that you go through, but it's exactly what it teaches. It teaches you how to work with other crew members. It takes you, how to take the time, because things happen at such a fast rate, i.e. what, Pops was just talking about, the guys transition to the jet era. And so now they really have done a great job, specifically working with American Airlines and Envoy through their 141 programs that they do, whether it be the 4-year universities or, again, like I said, ATP, which is another facility that does training with them. But yeah, CRM is very, very important. It's what we live by. And, like I said, it makes every pilot that goes from one to another aircraft and another crew member basically act like you've done it 100 times together, because it's smooth. It's like a dance.
Stu, let's talk about the end of Pan Am in 1991, because you're not only a Pan Am legend, but after Pan Am, you made a difference because you filed a lawsuit that ended up being successful and paved the way for other senior pilots to get employment. So let's first talk about the end of Pan Am, how that affected you, what you think about it, and then we can talk about the lawsuit.
Before the end, I put my name down in the event I ever got bounced off the 747. I had the 310 down as a backup. All of a sudden, I came back from a Pan Am trip. I've been in Moscow, long trip, flying out of New York, and I got back to Miami probably at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. And Jeff stayed up scheduling, had called and said, "Hey, Dad, call scheduling." And I said, screw scheduling. I'll call him in the morning. He said, "No, that's why I stayed up." So I called them, and they wanted me in class in the morning at 8 o'clock. I said, "Are you guys crazy?" But anyway, I said, "Can I have a minute to think about it?" But anyway, the bottom line, I was in class at 8 o'clock in the morning. And then by the end of the week, we were in ground school and went up to the simulator in Toronto. And I qualified on the 310, and I came back, and then I flew to 74 until 1 November. Then I started flying as a captain on the 310, and it took me about a month to get my head on straight. I could fly the airplane good, but I had to get up to speed again on the computers. Totally different from the Boeing cockpit and all the electronics on it. But anyway, I flew the 310 till I got to age 3. I flew as 3 years as captain with Delta, and we lost a lot in our retirement due to the bankruptcy and everything. But in any event, I got hold of an attorney. Delta wouldn't let us become engineers like other airlines and Pan Am and so forth. Once you hit 60, you could become a engineer.
And at that time, 60 was mandatory retirement.
Exactly. 60 was mandatory retirement. So,
And Jeff and Steven, what's mandatory retirement today?
65 today.
65.
Okay, 65. I'm sorry, Stu, continue.
yeah. So anyway, I selected an attorney in Chicago. He wrote a letter in my behalf and, saying I wanted to continue to be an engineer, et cetera, and sent it to Delta. And Delta answered, we run a safe operation. We don't want a former captain sitting behind our captains and second guessing them and so forth. Anyway, the lawsuit was filed with the EEOC. And after about 6 months, Delta threw up their hands. I won the lawsuit, and I had no help. I did it on my own, union or nobody else. I did it myself, paid for the whole thing. And Delta said, come on back. So I went back and went through training. Before I could go on the flight, they said, you got to sign this paper, and the contract. And I said, whoa, this is not what the court put down. So we went round and round on that. And I finally said, do you want a copy of what Delta agreed to? And so they finally gave me that, and I signed that. And unfortunately, they were trying to figure ways to get rid of us. And they had an engineer start failing us in the simulators. And so I had some phone calls right back to headquarters. And I always had somebody on the telephone with me if I was dealing on the phone with them. And in fact, one of the guys I used all the time was Bob Cassidy, one of our PanAm pilots. He happened to be there with me at the same time. I always wanted somebody to listen in on a conversation just in case there was a problem. And I let the company know. I said, hey, you got a rogue engineer, and the Delta themselves are doing this to us. We're going to be right back in court if you don't get this taken care of. And they had flunked virtually everybody that came through. And all of a sudden, they got rid of the rogue engineer, and everybody that they failed got back flying again. I flew captain for 3 years, and I flew engineer for 7 years. I finished just into December 2000, so just coming up on 2001 is when I retired.
How did that impact other pilots? And how did the union take all of this?
Well, the union never supported me at all. In fact, when we first came over to Delta, union met us. And of course, I spoke up big time because our salaries was cut. The Delta co-pilot who would fly with me, he made more than I did as a captain. And anyway, I definitely brought that to the union's attention. And that was a whole nother sad story. I never got up to full pay on Delta. But in any event, everybody that got busted after I got things settled out, everybody came back to work. It was really a great thing because some of the co-pilots, their retirement with Pan Am was like $180 a month or something. So the guys really needed an opportunity to continue to try to save whatever they could and make whatever they could before they were forced to retire.
And Jeff and Stephen, when you hear the story of your father and grandfather taking on a big American corporation, trying to get pilots the experience and the job that they require, how does that make you feel?
For me personally, obviously knowing my father at the time, when he turned age 60, Pops he's still in amazing shape. I mean, he would run 5 miles a day, 6 days a week. So health-wise, he definitely didn't have any issues like that. It's actually something that I kind of look up to and to take care of my body. But he's not fearful of any of the challenges. It's kind of just like the aviation he's done for years, whether it's, dealing with Mother Nature and putting an aircraft into some place. He was not afraid of that. He was doing what was right. The government unfortunately created the bankruptcy, and he was just kind of continuing to do what he did and fight for the little guys. And several guys had the opportunity, and I do believe that that's kind of what led to age 65, is because he proved that as long as you're healthy, you could maintain your first class medical. And if you had the knowledge to fly an aircraft and the equipment, then you should be able to use that experience and pass that down pass it down to future generations. It's imperative, to have knowledge, and knowledge is not something that you get overnight. It's something that you get over and over time. But no, I was very proud of him for not being scared to take on a large American corporation, to do what was right, to stick up for the little guy for the most part.
Stephen, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with all that. I mean, also going to the older age, you got somebody who's wise that's in the cockpit with you that's seen a lot of these different things, opposed to, i.e., the new 727 captain that hasn't seen a lot yet, and is making mistakes. When you got somebody who's back there who's seen a lot of stuff, who's had a lot of experiences, it adds a lot of experience, into the cockpit. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing as long as, like we said, you got to maintain your health, you got to maintain your medical, you got to maintain your academics. But I mean, if you're good on that, I think it's only a benefit.
Let's switch gears for a moment. And believe it or not, American Airlines is the only airline I have not flown on before. I've flown on pretty much everybody else, but not American.
We need to change that, Tom. We'd like to get you on board, part of the family. It's a fantastic airline.
One of my regrets in life is not flying on TWA or the Concorde when I was able to. But I heard that the flagship service of American Airlines is fantastic, and wanted the three of you to comment on it.
Going back for myself, seeing Pan American back in the day, as I said earlier, you're a suit and tie, and it was always, first class. American Airlines has really tried to bring flagship and do just that, because we have the customers, that are business travelers, and you like having that comfort and the amenities, but we also, have the ability for, to make that economical airfare where you're trying to go see the grandparents or whatever, and you don't have a whole lot of extra money. So you have the ability of both, but it's a phenomenal program that they have, and they try to maintain back in the heyday, that first class image.
And my condolences, I just saw just a couple days ago, the oldest serving flight attendant,
Yes.
Betty, recently passed away. What an inspiration she was for American Airlines.
Absolutely. It shows you the dedication, and it's like Dad, us, the aviators, the flight attendants, it's a career. You stick in and you're there for your 30, 35, 40 years, and in Betty's place it was what, 57 years, I believe it was. So it's a family. Really, the airlines, Pan American was a family, and American Airlines is truly a family. And like Stephen, like he said, when he initially, where he wanted to get hired, is he wanted to go to Envoy, because eventually he wanted to get to American and hopefully continue his career, where I'm at, and be here in Miami.
I think it's really a passion behind it. Getting into the airline, it's an incredible job. You do a lot of traveling, you see a lot of different places, and you become really good friends with the people that you do it with. So in Betty's case, I'm sure she loved the job. That's why she was the oldest flight attendant. That being said, it's a great career. You get in, you love the places you go to, you have a passion for your career. We all love it. That's why we do it.
We are going to take a quick break with a special aviation commercial from American Airlines. This commercial is historically important, as it was one of the first commercials after the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, and it sent an important message to the American public of inspiration, confidence, and patriotism, while sending the signal that the aviation industry was back in business and safe. The theme was originally composed to promote the merger of American Airlines and TWA, however was repurposed after 9/11. The airline released two versions, called Engine and Way of Life, in February 2002, that were celebrated by the industry. Both depict gleaming aircraft in a montage of actual American Airlines employees at work. Text that flashes on the screen states that the carrier is proud to be called American. The text describes the aviation industry as an economic engine and as a way of life encompassing freedom, confidence, and peace of mind. Let's take a listen to the theme called Engine by Steve Ford. Welcome back to our interview with PanAm Captain Stu Archer, his son, American Airlines Captain Jeff Archer, and grandson, Envoy Air Captain Stephen Archer. Stu, let's talk about PanAm again. So this is an airline that unfortunately went out of business, but the majority of the employees are still very loyal, and they're still very loyal to each other. It's an incredible thing to see, and I've been very fortunate through this history work to be adopted into that family, and it is just an incredible experience. Can you tell us a little bit about that dedication to that family?
I had spent time in the military overseas, and we all helped each other. We were based out in the countryside, Evreux, France, new wives and so forth, and we all helped each other. Well, it's the same thing with PanAm. The same thing. You're on long trips. Sometimes somebody run out of money, whether it be a flight attendant or whatever, and we'd help each other, or they'd need to get their bids in, and they didn't get their bids in, and we bring their bids back in bid form. In fact, I was flying to London out of Miami, and one of the flights was coming back from London to Miami. The captain's name was Roger Caron, and he had his son with him on a trip. And he said, "Hey, Stu, I couldn't get my son on the trip," and he was 8 years old and left him in London. He said, "Hey, would you check on him? I don't know if he's got any money with him or what he's got." And so when I got to London, I checked on him, and one of the PanAm folks had taken him home, and we communicated with him. And then the next day, the flight coming back, the captain looked after him and brought him right back to his house here in Miami. So over the years, doing those type of things, and we had a number of crew parties where we supported each other, and in some cases, I can tell you, the new flight attendants, we try to go eat, and they wouldn't have enough money to go eat. And on many occasions, when I knew there was a new one, I'd say, "Hey, don't worry about it. Come on, I'll cover your lunch. Don't worry about it." And so doing that over a period of years, we very definitely bonded. To this day, people ask us, I have president of the Clipper Pioneers and put together cruises most every year. And people look at us and say, "Geez, PanAm went down years ago. I can't believe you guys are still together." And yeah, we really bonded. We really bonded. Yeah, we do stay together. It's amazing. In fact, I was down in Miami and down at Coconut Grove. We were doing at the old PanAm terminal, and just adjacent to it, there's a restaurant that we were there, and it just opened, and they kind of tie into PanAm. And I was there in my PanAm uniform at the restaurant, and a young man came over to me and said, "Hey, could I take a picture with you?" I said, "Certainly." So he took a picture with me, and he said, "I'm going to American." I said, "You're kidding." I said, "Actually, my son and grandson are with American." Well, if you can believe it or not, I guess he checked in the next day or so, and he met the chief pilot, and the chief pilot And he told me, he said, "Hey, I just met a Pan Am guy and named Archer." And he said his son's here. He says he knew both Jeff and Steven. He says, "I'm going over to his house tonight," or something like that. And end up this fellow that took the picture with me got to know all of them, and he ended up over at my house also.
Yeah, it's a small Pan Am world. I always hear these kinds of stories, these connections that it's like there's some Pan Am angels that are connecting everybody. It's really interesting. As we near the end of our episode here, why is Pan Am important, and why should this history and this legacy be preserved for future generations? I open it up to all three of you. Stephen, you have a very unique perspective because you're a younger person. A lot of young people listen to this program. One of the reasons why we do what we do here at the Pan Am podcast and at the Pan Am Museum is try to preserve this history for young generations and future generations to discover it and appreciate it.
I think it's very important to preserve it. You know, Pan Am is almost it almost paved the way for aviation today in the terms of the things they do, in terms of, you know, being able to fly around the world. It's just history. You got to preserve that.
I agree with that. You know, like Steven said, the Pan American literally did pave the world by being able to cross continents, connect people together, different ways of life to bring it to where it's home and felt natural as opposed to, you know, keeping it at far distance. So Pan American really was vital to making it a global.
Yeah, very important. Pan Am was the first in most everything you can think of, whether it be in communications for the aircraft, all through the wilderness and the countrysides around the world. We started with ADFs for approaches and landings, and those have all been modernized. But Pan Am developed many of these things. It started in 1927, the first flight to Havana. They're going to be celebrating the 100th anniversary in just a few years from now, about 3 years from now, and it's going to be celebrated right here in Miami, Florida, in Coconut Grove. Like Jeff said, first around the world, first across the Atlantic, first across the Pacific, legendary in every single way. And the pilots, Lindbergh and Juan Trippe had Lindbergh as it helped develop for navigation, and it's just unbelievable the accomplishments of Pan Am. And people take a lot of things for granted, but a lot of pilots and people at Pan Am made this happen, and it's got us to where we are today. It's legendary.
Well, we covered a lot of topics about this, and I hope I was able to help you tell the Archer family of aviator stories. Is there anything the three of you would like to add as we near the end of our episode?
Well, I am so proud. My uncle Lawerence, he started this for our family, unbeknownst to me. And when he went off into the military, I remember he gave all of us children, my brothers and sisters, the four of us, he gave us each a $25 savings bond. And it's something I never forgot. And I never forgot the first flight I had. And when I was a kid, I saw a guy in a parachute coming down. And unbeknownst to me, it was my uncle testing things for GE. My uncle really, really had a tremendous influence on my career in aviation. I enjoyed talking to young kids. In fact, I was asked on one of my times in London if I would go to one of the local schools and talk to the children in London about aviation and so forth. And I also did the same thing in Tel Aviv one time. But it's so important to let the youth, to talk to them about some things that might be very interesting for them to look at, and help encourage the kids to study hard at school, and maybe that one day they'll become a pilot. But it's a great career.
Jeff, Stephen, any closing thoughts about your family? Jeff, your sister, Stephen, your aunt, that was a Pan Am flight attendant, and of course your father and grandfather Stu, who is the celebrated Pan Am pilot.
That he is, and it's it's an absolute honor, to be part of the family. Seeing my dad and what Deborah was able to do really inspired me to continue to do what I'm doing today. And I'm so blessed to be part of the Pan American family, and now transferring and got my kid now to follow the footsteps of my father. So it's an honor. It's Pan American has touched me, and it'll continue to touch me as years go on.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a total honor and nothing but respect, looking up and seeing you guys doing what you're doing. And it's great, man. I got big shoes to fill. That's all I think.
You got this.
All right. Well, there you have it. Well, thank you very much, captains. I very much appreciate your time. Take care, and we'll keep in touch.
Tom, you did a great job. That was very good. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
And enjoy the flight.
Pan Am was a pioneer in air travel and still stands as one of the most iconic and innovative airlines in aviation history. That legacy lives on at the Pan Am Museum in Garden City, New York, where you can explore the rich history of the aircrafts and individuals at the heart of the company known as the world's most experienced airline. For more information about the Pan Am Museum, check out our website at www.thepanammuseum.org. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. As was once a tagline in one of our commercials, we would greatly appreciate your support to help the Pan Am Museum continue making the going great. You can also support the museum by shopping on our online store for all things Pan Am, accessories, apparel, jewelry, books, models, and posters. We want to hear from you. If you have a question for us or want to share your story, our email address is podcast@thepanammuseum.org. We're going to close out this episode with another early 1980s Pan Am commercial for the Japanese market. As flight crews once said to passengers departing for their destinations around the world, "Thank you for flying, Pan Am."
さすがパンナムファーストクラス快適3パレットシートさすがパンナム快適クリッパークラスサービスさすがパンナムニューヨークロスシスコホノルル香港北京へノンストップ今さらに充実のサービスノンストップ